The wind sliced through the streets like a blade, and outside the old brick courthouse in downtown Baltimore, a line of people gathered. Some wore suits, some held briefcases, some just stood there with nervous eyes waiting to be called inside. Among them was a man no one looked at twice. He was wrapped in a tattered army blue jacket, the edges frayed like a memory long forgotten. His boots were worn, barely held together with tape. His hair was matted, skin dry and cracked from nights spent under bridges and park benches. But what stood out the most were his eyes. They weren't desperate. They weren't wild. They were still, too still. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He just waited, calmly, like a man who'd already been through worse than anything this courtroom could offer. They say the justice system doesn't see color, but it does. It sees status. And this man, he had none. No ID, no known address, no money, just a name on a docket. James. Just James. Interior. Courtroom. 10:07 a.m. The judge hadn't looked up yet. She was buried in the morning's paperwork. The clerk called the next name. Case 117B, State versus James Holloway. Heads turned. The room stilled. That name, it carried a strange echo. But it couldn't be. Could it? A bailiff opened the door, and in shuffled the man in the army green jacket. No handcuffs. He hadn't resisted arrest. Hadn't even spoken when they brought him in. He just complied. As he walked toward the defendant's table, people stared, not because they recognized him, but because he didn't flinch. Not under the weight of the stares, not under the silence, not even under the cold fluorescent lights that always made the guilty sweat. He sat, still. 2 days earlier, underpass, midnight. Rain poured like judgment from the heavens. Police had responded to a call about a black man acting suspicious near a grocery store. They found James curled up behind a dumpster, silent, soaking wet, holding a crumpled, half-burnt photo. They asked for ID. He said nothing. They arrested him. Why? Loitering, suspicion, failure to identify. Same routine, same outcome. Just another forgotten soul swept off the streets. But there was something about that photo. Back to courtroom, present moment. The judge looked up now, for the first time, and froze. Not visibly, not dramatically. But her fingers stopped moving. Her eyes lingered. Judge Sandra Whitmore, a woman known for her stern professionalism, had seen thousands of faces in her courtroom. But this one, there was something familiar about it. Defense attorney's whisper. Your Honor, my client's name is James Holloway. No middle name listed, no known relatives. He's been on the streets for a while, but there's no criminal record, nothing. Nothing? The judge repeated. Yes, ma'am. Fingerprints came back clean. No history, no identity beyond the name. She stared at the file. Holloway, Holloway, it echoed again. It's strange how a name can carry so much weight, even when the person behind it is invisible to the world. For most, James Holloway was nobody. But for Judge Whitmore, it stirred something buried deep in the past. A young Sandra Whitmore, then just an ambitious law student, was doing volunteer work, helping veterans prepare for civilian life. There was one man, tall, quiet, brilliant with maps and strategy. He was always reading. His name, James E. Holloway. Decorated war veteran, intelligence background, disappeared without a trace. Could it be the same man? Number impossible, right? The judge leaned forward. Mr. Holloway, do you know why you're here? James looked at her. For the first time, long, director, with eyes that were tired, but sharp. I know, he said, but I don't think you do. The room shifted. There was something in his voice. Deep, composed, almost rehearsed. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we're ready to proceed. The charges are simple: trespassing, failure to identify, and resisting minor questioning. But Judge Whitmore didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared into James's eyes. Something was screaming inside her. You know this man. But from where? The courtroom didn't know yet, but the storm had already begun. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't just another arrest. This was a reckoning, a truth buried beneath 3 decades of silence. Judge's chambers, later that day. Alone, the judge held the file. She pulled out the one item the police had confiscated during arrest, a half-burnt photo. 2 young soldiers standing in front of a Humvee. One of them, unmistakably James. The other, her brother. The next morning, courtroom interior, 9:02 a.m. The courtroom was colder than usual that morning, not because of the weather, because of the silence. Everyone was present. The defense attorney reviewed his papers with a mechanical stiffness. The prosecutor sipped his coffee, waiting for another routine conviction. The audience, a few bored journalists, some law students, and one elderly man who always sat in on trials he had nothing to do with, didn't expect anything unusual, except for Judge Sandra Whitmore. She sat differently now, stiffer, palms clenched beneath the bench. Her eyes didn't leave James Holloway. It can't be the same man, but what if it is? James sat still again, same posture, same silence, but his fingers tapped the wooden table, almost in rhythm, not nervous but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a code only he understood. Judge Whitmore softly. Defense, are we ready? Defense attorney. Yes, Your Honor. Prosecutor. We are. State's ready to proceed. Judge. Proceed. Prosecutor standing. Your Honor, this is a clear-cut case. The defendant was found loitering near a private business, refused to identify himself, and had no legal documentation. We are seeking a brief sentence or mandatory relocation to a shelter. Defense attorney calmly. Your Honor, my client did not resist arrest. He caused no harm, no theft, no violence. The only reason he's here is because he exists. The courtroom stirred. Because he exists? The prosecutor scoffed. Defense. Yes, that's the crime, isn't it? Being homeless, being black, being forgotten. We're criminalizing survival. Judge Whitmore looked up sharply. The defense attorney has struck a nerve, in her and in James. James turned his head slightly toward the defense table. A faint smirk touched the corner of his lips. Not arrogant, but appreciative, as if saying, finally, someone gets it. The prosecutor raised his hand. Actually, Your Honor, we may have something further. He pulled out a folder. This just came in this morning. It's strange. The name James Holloway triggered a flag in an old Department of Defense database. Apparently, there was a former intelligence operative by that name, MIA, for over 30 years. The room went silent. Defense attorney, blinking. MIA? Military? Prosecutor. Yes. It's likely not related. Could just be a name match. But protocol demands we submit it. He handed the file to the clerk, who brought it to the judge. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Judge reads the file. Name, James Emmanuel Holloway. Status, MIA, last known assignment, Afghanistan decorations, Silver Star, Purple Heart, National Intelligence Service medal missing. Since May 12, 1993. And there was a picture. Same face, younger, clean cut, strong eyes. But those eyes were unmistakable. Her eyes widened. It was him. 1991, Georgia Military Intelligence Base. She remembered now. He wasn't just another soldier. He was her brother's best friend, her protector when things got tough. Back then she was only 19, just visiting for summer break. And once, in the dead of night, when a drunken officer had tried something unforgivable, James Holloway had stopped it, silently, violently, and then disappeared from view. Nobody talked about it. The military covered it up. Her brother was killed in action a year later, and James vanished. Back to courtroom, present day. Judge Whitmore's throat dried. She looked up. "Mr. Holloway, do you remember me?" The question silenced the room. The attorneys turned. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a second. James didn't answer, just smiled, barely. James: "I remember a lot of things. Some good, some I wish I didn't." Bailiff steps forward. "Your Honor, should we recess?" Judge Whitmore: "No." Her voice was suddenly stronger than before. "We continue." In that moment, the balance shifted. This wasn't a trial anymore. This was history colliding with justice, forgotten names returning with full force, and the weight of truth too heavy to ignore. Defense attorney sits with James during break. Defense: "Look, I'm not going to lie to you. If that DOD file is real, your whole life's about to be exposed. People will want to know where you've been, why you disappeared." James quietly: "Wouldn't be the first time people came looking. And when they find out the truth, they'll wish they hadn't." Defense: "What truth?" James leaned in. "James, they buried a mission, one we were never supposed to survive. I wasn't lost. I was left." Judge's chambers, that evening. Judge Whitmore stared at her reflection in the window, the city skyline blurred with fog. She remembered the letter her brother wrote before his last deployment, the one she never opened. She dug it out from an old box in her office drawer. Torn edges, yellowing envelope. Her name scribbled on it, "To Sandra. If anything ever happens to me, trust James." Her hand trembled as she opened it. "Sandra, there are things I can't tell you, but if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. James knows everything. He was there. If he ever returns, help him. Protect him like he protected us." Tears welled up in her eyes. She looked back at James's photo. "You didn't disappear," she whispered. "You were protecting something." Next morning, courthouse holding room. A dim light flickered above. James sat on a hard bench, his hands folded calmly on his lap. Across from him, the defense attorney held the Department of Defense file with a look of disbelief. Defense attorney: "James, this says you were declared dead. Officially, a military funeral was held in your name. You were honored on memorial walls. What the hell happened out there?" James didn't answer immediately. He exhaled through his nose like he'd been waiting decades to speak. "James," low voice, "they needed us to disappear. So they wrote our names in stone and walked away." Courtroom, 10:15 a.m. Reassembled for special testimony hearing. The room was unusually full. Word had spread. Local reporters, veterans, even a few off-duty officers were now watching from the back. Judge Whitmore walked in, composed, but a storm swirled just beneath her skin. "Judge, Mr. Holloway, I am ordering a temporary stay on all charges. There is reason to believe your identity and your history require federal review." The prosecutor stood. Prosecutor: "Your Honor, this man is not above the law simply because he claims to be a ghost from a forgotten mission." Judge cutting him off: "He's not above the law, but he might be above your understanding." Gasps. A few murmurs. One camera clicked. Judge turns to James. "Judge Whitmore, gently. Mr. Holloway, would you like to tell the court who you really are? James looked up. For the first time in this entire process, he didn't look like a homeless man. He looked like a soldier, a man who had seen things no one could carry alone. He stood. James. My name is Staff Sergeant James Emmanuel Holloway, U.S. Army. I served from 1984 to 1993. And the reason I'm standing here today is because some stories refuse to stay buried. There were 7 of us. We were sent on a covert mission in Kandahar, classified even from top brass. Intel said we were hunting a rogue militia leader. What we found was a deal between U.S. officials and a private arms network. Images flicker. Desert winds, night vision goggles, a truck ambush, fire. We were told to stand down, but one of our men, John Whitmore, the judge's brother, he said no. He was going to report it. Gunfire, betrayal, blood. They ordered an airstrike on our own coordinates, said it was an accident. 4 of us died, 2 disappeared, and I went dark. Dead silence, no one moved. The prosecutor's smug face drained to pale confusion. The defense attorney looked stunned, and Judge Whitmore sat frozen. Tears rimmed her eyes. James, steady. I buried your brother with my own hands, ma'am, in the sand. Wrapped him in the American flag he always carried. He told me to survive, to keep the truth alive. But I couldn't speak, not until now. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's weight, it's memory, it's sacrifice. As the court recessed for federal review, James was escorted through a hallway filled with cameras, microphones, questions. Were you really left behind? Is this a government cover-up? Why did you come back now? James didn't answer, but he looked up, and for the first time in decades, let himself feel the sun on his face again without shame. Judge Whitmore sat at her desk, hands shaking, rereading her brother's old letter again and again. She finally whispered aloud, "You were right, John. He kept his promise." Her phone buzzed. It was a federal marshal. "Ma'am, we've begun official re-verification, but off the record, we believe Mr. Holloway is telling the truth." She looked at the burned photo on her desk, the one James had been found holding. Her brother and James, smiling, standing side by side, before everything broke. The world often forgets the ones who carry its weight, but truth has a way of rising, even when buried in silence, dust, and dishonor. In the next part, justice comes face to face with the cost of its own blindness, and one man's name will never be forgotten again. Days later, Baltimore Federal Courthouse. Outside, the news vans lined the sidewalk like soldiers preparing for battle. Inside, the courtroom was full, not with routine traffic violations or petty charges, but with history. Retired veterans sat in silence. Journalists scribbled. The judge walked in slowly, with gravity in her steps. And at the defense table, James Holloway sat, not in the same army green jacket, but in a neatly pressed black blazer, loaned to him by a local church. Sometimes justice wears a robe. Sometimes it limps in, scarred and silent, asking nothing but to be heard. Judge Whitmore. After a thorough federal investigation, the court acknowledges the following. Staff Sergeant James Holloway was declared MIA in 1993 under suspicious circumstances. Evidence submitted, including classified communications, mission logs, and a recovered witness letter, confirm a cover-up. Gasps. The judge paused. Her voice cracked, just once. Judge Whitmore, softer. This man saved my brother's life once, and when he couldn't, he honored it with his silence. A man in a sharp black suit watched carefully. He was from the Pentagon, sent not to defend, but to contain. He took quiet notes. His job was not justice, it was damage control. Prosecutor stands up hesitantly. Prosecutor, Your Honor, in light of the evidence and the Department of Defense's acknowledgement, the state withdraws all charges. Judge Whitmore firmly. All charges against Mr. James Holloway are officially dismissed. This courtroom owes him an apology. This country owes him more than that. The entire courtroom rises. And then it happened. First, the bailiff stood, then the defense attorney, then the clerk, then the journalists, then the old man in the back, then everyone else. The entire courtroom stood in silence, not as a rule, but as a sign of respect for the man who had been invisible and was now unforgettable. He entered the courtroom as a ghost, a homeless man with no past, but he left as a soldier, as a name, as a truth the system could no longer deny. Outside the court, media frenzy. Mr. Holloway, will you speak to the press? What would you say to the government today? How did you survive out there all those years? James raised his hand to silence the noise. James, calm, direct. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting for someone to finally look past the dirt on my face and ask who I used to be. He turned and walked away. No limo, no fanfare, just a man walking, upright, unchained, seen. James sat with a group of younger veterans, laughing for the first time in what felt like decades. He had been offered money, interviews, podcasts, books. He turned them all down. Instead, he asked for one thing. Let me talk to the ones still out there, the ones no one sees. Judge Whitmore opened a dusty lockbox. Inside were two medals, her brother's Silver Star, and the one she had privately requested be reissued to James Holloway. She placed them side by side on her desk, lit a candle, and whispered, "John, he made it home." James returned, not to sleep,